All right. So finally for this evening, for those of you who've been with us the whole evening, thank you so much for your participation and your engagement with our students, almost doctors. But this is our last one for this evening, and this is almost Dr. Laura Savastano, and her work has been focused on, she is a school-based practitioner for the last probably, I think you're closer to 6 or 7 years now. And she has been focused on both autism and trauma, and some of the assistive tech pieces that go along with those two things in her school-based role over the last couple of years. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Laura, and we're going to hear about her presentation with iPad applications.
Hi, I'm Laura Savastano. My research is titled iPad Applications for Supporting Occupational Performance of Children with Autism Spectrum Disorder Across Age Groups. Autism spectrum disorder is a lifelong neurodevelopmental disorder that is characterized by persistent deficits. Oh, it's not changing. There we go. Sorry. Neurodevelopmental disorder that is characterized by persistent deficits in verbal and nonverbal communication, social interactions, and repetitive or restricted patterns of behavior that could affect the lives of individuals with autism and their primary caregivers. It is important for professionals to look at how these areas of difficulty shift as well as develop as the child ages. For the purposes of this study, the lifespan was broken up into four main stages. In early childhood, the focus is on family, which is seen in the fact that the areas of difficulty are establishing family routines, community participation, and building in opportunities for socialization. When a child transitions to middle childhood, differences in social emotional development, motor impairments, activity participation, increased vulnerability to bullying, and complexities of school become evident. These children also struggle more than their typical aged peers when it comes to social competencies, such as initiating, responding, and continuing communication with others. As one enters adolescence, the physical changes they experience are just like that of their typically developing peers. The disparity comes in the socialization, communication, executive functioning, and sensory modulation. It is typical that daily living skills will start to increase in independence and continue to increase as they transition into adulthood. Once in adulthood, people with autism can struggle with employment, accessing higher education, transportation, community participation, and friendships or romantic relationships. Another area of struggle is that if individuals are not able to complete daily living skills independently, they are unable to live on their own and must rely on family to care for them or a group home situation. For those of you that do not know, the iPad is a tablet that was introduced by Apple in 2010. They run on applications, and as a result, there are endless possibilities for how it can support individuals with autism. This allows for portable instruction that is computer assisted. It is also more socially acceptable and allows the student to blend in and reduces the social stigma. Children with autism show a preference for learning with technology, especially when it's game-based. One study looked at kids with autism and how they used iPads. It showed that 87% of participants' time was spent in applications. The other 13% of their time was spent on the home screen or in the settings of that application making changes. The iPad and its apps can be used to support routines by increasing play skills, decreasing challenging behaviors, increasing academic engagement, acting as a speech generating AAC device, and providing video models. A study was done with 3 participants who had autism and looked at if they were able to learn how to cook meals using an iPad with visual prompting technology. The participants were able to be independent in cooking various meals after 6 to 8 intervention sessions, and they maintained that skill for at least 1 to 7 weeks. Another study was done on the use of the DJ Brush app. This study showed that the application was motivating not only to the participants with autism and got them to engage in the routine of brushing their teeth, but was also educational to the parents in the regards to dental hygiene. Children with autism can fulfill a myriad of roles, including student, sibling, and friend. Technology has become more prevalent in schools, especially for kids with autism, as it works with academics and behaviors. A review of research found rapid improvements in sight word reading after using a computer-based intervention. In mathematics, less prompts were required for students to attend and complete their work. Siblings are often the first peer models for some children with autism. A study looked at a sibling training program that utilized iPad games to teach, maintain, and generalize skills necessary for social interaction. The mothers of these children in the study reported that the children used their skills that they were taught in daily life and were able to generalize the skills across different skill sets. The iPad can also be used to show or play social stories that visually portray domestic life, transportation, and social settings for children with autism. A study found that social stories were only mildly effective in improving behaviors. However, the effectiveness of the social stories did increase when it was paired with video prompting. The objective of this research aims to work with a nonprofit organization to survey parents who have received iPads as well as applications through them. The research seeks to find out if there are apps that are most helpful to families and what they are, as well as ascertain which apps are able to support the child with autism as they get older. For the last 10 years, this nonprofit organization has been hosting anywhere from 1 to 4 iPad days a year. For this study, the survey was sent to every participant from those iPad days for the last 5 years, which was a pool of 230 families. This survey consisted of multiple choice questions as well as short answer questions. The quantitative information collected was analyzed using descriptive statistics, and the qualitative data was analyzed for common themes. Of the 230 families that were approached about completing this survey, 18 families completed the survey. There were also approximately 10 emails that were returned to sender or a change of email address. This resulted in a total response rate of 8.18%. The graph on the left shows the age of the iPad recipient is currently. The one on the right shows the age that the child received the current age of the child. It's clear that the majority of children are on the younger side of the spectrum, as the majority of the graphs are red, yellow, and blue. When looking at the graphs, the percentage of children in each group did not change drastically from the age they received the iPad to the age they are currently. Based on that, it's hypothesized that the majority of families that answered this survey had the iPad for closer to 1 to 3 years and not the 4 to 5 year mark. If families had the iPads for 5 years, there would have been a more significant jump in the ages. Having families complete the survey that are closer to the 1 to 3 year mark could be due to the fact that the further the families get out from receiving their iPads, the less they are involved with the organization. First, families were asked if the iPad was helpful in supporting routines. 11 of the 18 families felt that the iPad was in fact helpful. There were two main themes that came out, which were creating and maintaining a schedule, as well as supporting transitions. Some of the specific benefits that parents described were focused on morning and bedtime routines, getting dressed, and transitioning from home to school. Other benefits described lend themselves to children that are slightly on the older side and would be able to complete these routines and transitions on their own or with minimal assistance from an adult. With two families that received the iPad when the child was under 2 and some that are between the ages of 3 and 4, the children are likely not responsible for those skills yet. Most children under 4 are not expected to complete daily routines without parental involvement. Families were also asked if they felt the iPad supported their child as they got older. 16 of the 18 families felt that the iPad supported the aging process. There were 5 main themes that came out, including reduced frustration, increased communication, transitions, learning new skills, and growing with them. The theme of increased communication makes sense as it is also a priority for most of the families. As the children learn new skills or increase their ability to communicate, it is likely going to decrease the frustration that that child may experience on a daily basis. When the child is able to regulate and manage their frustration, it will make transitioning from preferred to non-preferred activities easier. All of these variables together make it easier for the child as they grow and for the iPad to grow with them. Families were also asked if there were other things that would be helpful in supporting the iPad recipient as they age. 6 families said that new apps or ideas of apps would be helpful. 3 families talked about the need for device protection. 3 families said they had no ideas, and the other 4 families had miscellaneous thoughts. Families were asked to rate the change that they saw in their recipient across 12 different occupations. They could rate the change as notable, minor, none, or not applicable. The results are seen in this graph. Of the 12 areas, 10 had notable change outranking the other options. The 2 areas that had minor change rated higher were safety and security, as well as healthy living. The areas of safety and security and healthy living were only rated as having minor change for most families. It's hypothesized that these 2 areas had less of a significant change because the majority of children in this survey were on the younger side. Children that fall into the early childhood and part of middle childhood stages are not expected to understand safety and security or healthy living yet. The 2 areas that had the most families rate it as a notable change were communication and making vocalizations, as well as their ability to occupy themselves. On the right, you will see a graph depicting the applications that the nonprofit offers the families and what they use on a daily basis. The top 5 rated apps were Alpha Blocks by 6 families, and 4 families rated Trucks by Byron Barton, 5 Little Monkeys, Toka Trains, and Toka Builders as being used daily. It's hypothesized that the trucks with Byron Barton, Toka Trains, and Toka Builders were rated highly as they typically appeal to younger boys. Alpha Blocks is a very engaging application that not only teaches letter skills, but has music and games integrated, making it a very engaging app for children in the middle and early childhood stages, where the majority of the children in this survey fell. Families were also asked if there were other applications that they found helpful or that they used on a daily basis. All of the apps submitted by families are on the list on the left side of the screen. 6 of the families mentioned YouTube or YouTube Kids. This is most likely because it helps with the occupation of being able to entertain themselves, which is one of those occupations that the families rated had the most notable change. The apps of IXL and Llama Life ADHD Routine and Task were submitted by the families of the children on the older end of the spectrum, which makes sense as these apps are more functional in nature. Based on the families expressing a need for a resource of applications for as their child gets older, a 16-page resource was created for the nonprofit organization. This table features apps that were not only part of the survey, but apps that were recommended by the family, as well as apps that were discovered by the researcher. This resource includes the app name, the developer, the price, as well as some information about the app's features. It includes fine motor, handwriting, visual spatial, self-regulation, movement, early learner academics, advanced academics, social skills, communication, sensory, schedules, typing, books and read-alongs, musicals, self-care, healthy living, games, and miscellaneous. This is a snapshot from the handwriting section of the resource. The resource itself contains 126 applications across all the categories. This is a section from the self-regulation part of the resource. It is only a snapshot of the full section. The apps in this resource do range in price from free to a one-time cost, as well as a subscription model for some, all of which is laid out in the resource for parents. This one is a snapshot from the early learner academic section. You will note that it contains both reading and math applications. The apps are targeted towards students that are early learners, as well as those students who are in earlier grades. This is a snapshot from the self-care section of the resource. It includes, again, not only apps to support the child, but also some apps to support the parents when it comes to having difficult conversations around puberty and self-care. One of the limitations for this study was its response rate. For the results to be credible, a return rate would ideally be closer to 33%. Our return rate was only 8.18%. Another limitation is that based on the recipient's age, the iPad was received and the age that the iPad recipient is currently, it appears that the majority of those that completed the survey only had the device for a year or two. This means that the survey may not have been able to fully capture the true long-term effects of using the iPad with a child who has autism as they get older. However, the results are still beneficial, but should be interpreted with caution. Looking forward, for some therapists, their use of technology is believed to have negative implications for a child, such as increased social isolation, increased social interactions, perseveration, and increased repetitive movements. This study shows that there are benefits for children with autism when it comes to the iPad. The iPad has benefits not only in communication, but also in supporting fine motor skills, hygiene skills, functional routines, and transitions. For some therapists, iPad availability, lack of funding, and lack of training or knowledge regarding the iPad act as a barrier to the use of the iPad in therapy. This study can serve as a resource for therapists as it provides ideas of applications that are helpful for kids with autism. One study showed that when a therapist or professional supported a child with autism on their iPad, their appropriate usage of the iPad increased by 20%. One recommendation for therapists would be to not be afraid of using technology with students and embrace the opportunity to learn. When a therapist embraces technology, it allows them to recommend applications that would be beneficial and oversee their child's use, as well as support carryover from school to home to therapy. Moving forward, this information will be presented to the nonprofit organization's founders as well as the team that oversees the iPad Days. The reference tool will be provided to the families in the organization as well as to the organization to use moving forward. The information gathered from this survey will also be used to support the overhauling of the iPad program itself. I would just like to thank my family and friends for supporting me, as well as Dr. Humbert for supporting me in this process. Any questions?
Oh, my video didn't want to go off. Thank you, Laura, for a fantastic presentation. Are there questions in the audience? Tam, would you like the first question?
I will. I'll ask the first question. And I really don't know this. We didn't talk about this, Laura, but is this the first time that this organization has done a review of the use of iPads?
So after each of their iPad days, they send families a very generic survey to get a feel for what they liked about the day, what they didn't like about the day, and what they are like looking forward to using. They haven't done a long-term review to look at families past that. About like, I think if they typically send it out about 6 weeks after the iPad day, so it's a very short-term survey.
And do you think that they will be receptive to doing this on a more regular basis, especially if, if you lose contact with individuals, but to follow up more long term?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I actually was talking to them this past week that I'm meeting with them in January, and part of when we revamp the iPad days, they want to work in being able to survey families more long term versus just 6 weeks after.
That's fair. Other questions? I think that the parent survey response rate is not unique to you. Several of the students have been looking at parent surveys, and the response has been somewhat lower. So I'm wondering if you think that's more of a perception of just knowing that their opinion may not necessarily make a difference in the program, or if it's like a survey burnout kind of thing. I don't
Um,
know.
I met with the two founders of the nonprofit when we were developing the survey, and one of them said that they were concerned that we wouldn't have any parents respond because their 6 week survey gets very little responses. And they even put an incentive on it sometimes for families. But the owner or the founder did make a good point that a lot of the families that we're surveying have kids with severe autism. So the last thing that they typically have time to do is fill out a survey. And so
Hmm.
that will impact their ability to answer surveys.
Hmm. Yeah. So I guess I would say don't take it personally because
Yeah.
it's certainly been across the board in a bunch of different things that we've been doing. So yeah.
Yeah.
Lucy, I think you have a question.
Yes, I had a comment. I wanted to say, yes, I know there was like a small, like with the number of surveys that was sent out, I still feel like there's still valuable information pulled from it. So I do want to say congratulations and thank you for doing that because I do think that it can be challenging or feel that way when you get fewer responses than expected. But I think you did a really good job of pulling that data from what you did get from the families. So thank you.
Any other questions? Well, you're getting a great job. Lots of folks talking about how you did a nice job. So nice job with your presentation. Nice job with all the work you've done over the last few months and year. And you almost will be a doctor in the next couple weeks or so. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming this evening. I'm going to close down the recordings. Each of the students will have their own recording. And of course, the college will have access to all of them as well. So if anyone would like the recordings, you're welcome to email me anytime you like. I'll put my email in the chat so the folks who are here can get them. If you happen to be an occupational therapist and you would like continuing ed credit for this evening, you're welcome to email me that as well. And I would be happy to extend continuing ed credit for the presentations you watched this evening. If you're a student in our program, you don't need continuing ed because you just did an entire doctorate and that will serve as your continuing ed for the next 3 years. But if you are a therapist visiting us, please feel free to do